Hi, Grandma here, and I'm reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and this is chapter 28, part 2, which will start in my book on page 348. Before we begin, I want to talk a little bit about foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is when an author will give you hints as to what is going to happen. And we have a lot of hints about what's going to happen in the second half of this chapter. First of all, Atticus and Alexandra have stayed home for different reasons. They're tired, and Jim is taking Scout to the took Scout to the fall pageant. Also, we find out that it is dark and no outside lights and no moon. They had a hard time seeing going in to the pageant, much less coming out. Also, Cecil was able to sneak up on them and scare them, which, you know, I don't know if they were preoccupied with the pageant or it was just that dark. Also, we have in the first part of 28, others have asked them if they need a ride home, and they said, oh, no, we'll be fine. We also know that Jim asked Scout if she wanted to take her costume off, and she said no, she'd just walk home in it. But we've already been told that this costume made out of chicken wire prevents her from getting her hands up. She can barely see out of it, and she can walk, but she can't do much else of anything else. And the final foreshadowing is this is Halloween, and it's a very scary time for a lot of people. It gets dark earlier. There's a breeze that blows leaves around, and we think somebody's back there. There are a lot of things that happen this time of year. So they are on their way home. Here, Scout, let me hold on to your hock. You might lose your balance. Oh, I can see all right. Yeah, but you might lose your balance. I felt a slight pressure on my head and assumed that Jim had grabbed the end of the ham. You got me? Uh-huh. We began crossing the black schoolyard, straining to see our feet. Jim, I said, I forgot my shoes. They're back behind the stage. Well, let's go get them. But as we turned around, the auditorium lights went off. You can't get them. You can get them tomorrow, he said. But tomorrow's Sunday, I protested as Jim turned me homeward. You can get the janitor to let you in, Scout. Nothing. Jim had started that in a long time. Jim hadn't started that in a long time. I wondered what he was thinking. He'd tell me when he wanted to, probably when we got home. I felt his fingers press the top of my costume too hard, it seemed. I shook my head. Jim, you don't have to. Hush a minute, Scout, he said, pinching me. We walked along silently. Minute's up, I said. What you thinking about? I turned to look at him, but his outline was barely visible. Thought I heard something, he said. Stop a minute. We stopped. Hear anything, he said. No. We had not gone 5 paces before he made me stop again. Now, do you see all the foreshadowing even on this page? What are some examples that you have heard? It's dark. She's about to lose her balance. They think somebody is following them. And she's left her shoes at school. And the lights in the auditorium have gone out. Jim, are you trying to scare me? You know I'm too old. Be quiet, he said, and I knew he was not joking. The night was still. I could hear his breath coming easily beside me. Occasionally, there was a sudden breeze that hit my bare legs, but it was all that remained of a promised windy night. This was the stillness before a storm. We listened. Heard an old dog just then, I said. It's not that, Jim answered. I hear it when we're walking along, but when we stop, I don't hear it. Oh, you hear my costume rustling. Oh, it's just Halloween got you. I said it more to convince myself than Jim, for sure enough, as we began walking, I heard what he was talking about. It was not my costume. "Oh, it's just old Cecil," said Jim presently. "He won't get us. Don't let him think we're hurrying." We slowed to a crawl. I asked Jim how Cecil could follow us in the dark. Looked to me like he'd bump into us from behind. "Well, I can see you, Scout," Jim said. "How? I can't see you." "Well, your fat streaks are showing. Mrs. Crenshaw painted them with some of that shiny stuff so they'd show up under the floodlights. I can see you pretty well, and I expect Cecil can see you well enough to keep his distance." I would show Cecil that we knew he was behind us, and we were ready for him. "Cecil Jacobs is a big wet hen," I yelled, suddenly turning around. We stopped. There was no acknowledgement save Hen bouncing off the distant schoolhouse wall. "I'll get him," said Jim. "Hey! Hey, hey, hey," said the schoolhouse wall. It was unlike Cecil to hold out for so long. Once he pulled a joke, he'd repeat it time and again. "We should have been leapt at already." Jim signaled for me to stop again. He said softly, "Scout, can you take that thing off?" "Oh, I think so, but I ain't got anything on under it much." "I've got your dress here. I can't get it on in the dark." "Okay," he said, "never mind." "Jim, are you afraid?" "No, think we're almost to the tree now. A few yards from that and we'll be to the road. We can see the street light then." Jim was talking in an unhurried, flat, toneless voice. I wondered how long he would try to keep the Cecil myth going. "You reckon we ought to sing, Jim?" "No, be real quiet, Scout." We had not increased our pace. Jim knew as well as I that it was difficult to walk fast without stumping a toe, tripping on stones and other inconveniences, and I was barefooted. Maybe it was the wind rustling the trees, but there wasn't any wind, and there weren't any trees except that big oak. Our company shuffled and dragged his feet, as if wearing heavy shoes. Whoever it was wore thick cotton pants. What I thought were trees rustling was the soft swish of cotton on cotton, wheek, wheek, with every step. I felt the sand go cold under my feet, and I knew we were near the big oak. Jim pressed my head. We stopped and listened. Shufflefoot had not stopped with us this time. His trousers swished softly and steadily. Then they stopped. He was running toward us with no child's steps. "Run, Scout, run, run," Jim screamed. I took one giant step and found myself reeling, my arms useless in the dark. I could not keep my balance. Jim, help me, Jim." Something crushed the chicken wire around me. Metal ripped on metal, and I fell to the ground and rolled as far as I could, floundering to escape my wire prison. From somewhere nearby came scuffling, kicking sounds of shoes and flesh scraping dirt and roots. Someone rolled against me, and I felt Jim. He was up like lightning and pulling me with him. But though my head and shoulders were free, I was so entangled we couldn't get very far. We were nearly to the road when I felt Jim's hand leave me, felt him jerk backwards to the ground. More scuffling, and there came a dull, crunching sound, and Jim screamed. I ran in the direction of Jim's scream and sank into a flabby male stomach. Its owner said, "Oof," and tried to catch my arms, but they were tightly pinioned. His stomach was soft, but his arms were like steel. He slowly squeezed the breath out of me. I could not move. Suddenly, he was jerked backwards and flung on the ground, almost carrying me with him. I thought, Jim's up. One mind works very slowly at times. Stunned, I stood there dumbly. The scuffling noises were dying. Someone wheezed, and the night was still again. Still, but for a man breathing heavily and staggering. I thought he went to the tree and leaned against it. He coughed violently, a sobbing, bone-shaking cough. Jim? There was no answer but the man's heavy breathing. Jim? Jim didn't answer. The man began moving around as if searching for something. I heard him groan and pull something heavy along the ground. It was slowly coming to me that there were now 4 people under the tree. Atticus? The man was walking heavily and unsteadily toward the road. I went to where I thought he had been and felt frantically along the ground, reaching out with my toes. Presently, I touched someone. Jim? My toes touched trousers, a belt buckle, buttons, something I could not identify, a collar and a face, a prickly stubble on face, told me it was not Jim's. I smelled stale whiskey. I made my way along in what I thought was the direction of the road. I was not sure because I had been turned around so many times, but I found it and looked down to the streetlight. A man was passing under it. A man was walking with the staccato steps of someone carrying a load too heavy for him. He was going around the corner. He was carrying Jim. Jim's arms was dangling crazily in front of him. By the time I reached the corner, the man was crossing our front yard. Light from our front door framed Atticus for an instant. He ran down the steps, and together he and the man took Jim inside. I was at the front door when they were going down the hall. Aunt Alexandra was running to meet me. Call Dr. Reynolds. Atticus's voice came sharply from Jim's room. Where's Scout? Here she is, Aunt Alexandra called, pulling me along with her in the telephone. She tugged at me anxiously. I'm all right, Auntie. I said, you better call. She pulled the receiver from the hook and said, Eula May, get Dr. Reynolds quick. Agnes, is your father home? Oh, God, where is he? Please tell him to come over here as soon as he comes in. Please, it's urgent. There was no need for Aunt Alexandra to identify herself. People in Macomb knew each other's voices. Atticus came out of Jim's room. The moment Aunt Alexandra broke the connection, Atticus took the receiver from her. He rattled the hook and then said, Eula May, get me the sheriff, please. Heck, Atticus Finch, someone's been after my children. Jim's hurt between here and the schoolhouse. I can't leave my boy. Run out there for me, please, and see if he's still around. Doubt if you'll find him now, but I'd like to see him if you do. Got to go now. Thanks, Heck. Atticus, is Jim dead? No, Scout. Look after her, sister, he called as he went down the hall. Aunt Alexandra's fingers trembled as she unwound the crushed fabric and wire from me. Are you all right, darling? She asked over and over as she worked me free. It was a relief to be out. My arms were beginning to tingle, and they were red from the small hexagonal marks. I rubbed them, and they felt better. Auntie, is Jim dead? No, darling. He's unconscious. We won't know how badly he's hurt until Dr. Reynolds gets here. Jean Louise, what happened? I don't know. She left it at that. She brought me something to put on, and had I thought about it then, I would have never let her forget it. In her distraction, Auntie brought me my overalls. Put these on, darling, she said, handing me the garments she most despised. She rushed back to Jim's room, then came to me in the hall. She patted me vaguely and went back to Jim's room. A car stopped in front of the house. I knew Dr. Reynolds' step almost as well as my father's. He had brought Jim and me into the world, had led us through every childhood disease known to man, including the time Jim fell out of the treehouse, and he had never lost our friendship. Dr. Reynolds said if we had been boil-prone, things would have been different, but we doubted it. He came in the door and said, Good Lord. He walked toward me and said, You're still standing? And changed his course. He knew every room in the house. He also knew that if I was in bad shape, so was Jim. After 10 forevers, Dr. Reynolds returned. Is Jim dead? I asked. Oh, far from it, he said, squatting down to me. He's got a bump on the head just like yours, and a broken arm. Scout, look that way. No, don't turn your head, roll your eyes. Now look over yonder. He's got a bad break so far as I can tell. Now it's in the elbow, like somebody tried to wring his arm off. Now look at me. Then he's not dead. No, Dr. Reynolds got to his feet. We can't do much tonight, he said, except try to make him as comfortable as we can. We'll have to x-ray his arm. Looks like he'll be wearing his arm way out by his side for a while. Don't worry, though, he'll be good as new. Boys his age bounce. While he was talking, Dr. Reynolds had been looking keenly at me, lightly fingering the bump that was coming on my forehead. You don't feel broke anywhere, do you? Dr. Reynolds' small joke made me smile. Then you don't think he's dead, then? He put on his hat. Now, I may be wrong, of course, but I think he's very alive. Shows all the symptoms of it. Go have a look at him, and when I come back, we'll get together and decide. Dr. Reynolds' step was young and brisk. Mr. Heck Tate's was not. His heavy boots punished the porch. He opened the door awkwardly, but he said the same thing Dr. Reynolds said when he came in. You all right, Scout? He added. Yes, sir, I'm going in to see Jim. Atticus and them's in there. I'll go with you, said Mr. Tate. Aunt Alexandra had shaded Jim's reading light with a towel, and his room was dim. Jim was lying on his back. There was an ugly mark along one side of his face. His left arm lay out from his body. His elbow was bent slightly, but in the wrong direction. Jim was frowning. Jim? Atticus spoke. He can't hear you, Scout. He's out like a light. He was coming around, but Dr. Reynolds put him out again. Yes, sir, I retreated. Jim's room was large and spare and square. Aunt Alexandra was sitting in a rocking chair by the fireplace. The man who brought Jim in was standing in a corner, leaning against the wall. He was some countryman I did not know. He had probably been at the pageant and was in the vicinity when it happened. He must have heard our screams and come running. Atticus was standing by Jim's bed. Mr. Heck Tate stood in the doorway. His hat was in his hand, and a flashlight bulged from his pants pocket. He was in his working clothes. Come in, Heck, said Atticus. Did you find anything? I can't conceive of anyone low down enough to do a thing like this, but I hope you found him. Mr. Tate sniffed. He glanced sharply at the man in the corner, nodded to him, and then looked around the room, at Jim, at Aunt Alexandra, then at Atticus. Sit down, Mr. Finch, he said pleasantly. Atticus said, Let's all sit down. Have that chair, Heck. I'll get another one from the living room. Mr. Tate sat in Jim's desk chair. He waited until Atticus returned and settled himself. I wondered why Atticus had not brought a chair for the man in the corner, but Atticus knew the way of country people far better than I. Some of his rural clients would park their long-eared steeds under the chinaberry trees in the backyard, and Atticus would often keep appointments on the back steps. This one was probably more comfortable where he was. Mr. Finch, said Mr. Tate, tell you what I found. I found a little girl's dress. It's out there in my car. That's your dress, Scout? Yes, sir, it's a pink one with smocking, I said. Mr. Tate was behaving as if he were on the witness stand. He liked to tell things in his own way, untrammeled by state or defense, and sometimes it took a while. I found some funny-looking pieces of muddy-colored cloth. That's my costume, Mr. Tate. Mr. Tate ran his hands down his thighs. He rubbed his left arm and investigated Jim's mantelpiece. Then he seemed to be interested in the fireplace. His fingers sought his long nose. What is it, Heck? Said Atticus. Mr. Tate found his neck and rubbed it. Bob Yule's lying on the ground under that tree down yonder with a kitchen knife stuck up under his ribs. He's dead, Mr. Finch. Well, was that what you were expecting to happen? Something like that. So, did Jim and Scout have a knife with them when they went to school? I hadn't heard them say they did. So, where did the kitchen knife come from? And who was the fourth person under that tree? Probably that country man that's standing in the corner, don't you think? Now, I wonder, is that who stabbed Bob Ewell? And who is he? See you later. Bye-bye.